All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the What's New in KeyShot 7.2 webinar. My name is Rex Roberts and I'm the UX Design Lead at Luxion. I'm joined today by Will Gibbons, our Global Training Specialist, and we'll be tag teaming today's webinar to show you all the great new stuff in the latest KeyShot 7.2 update. As always, a recording of this webinar will be available at youtube.com/keyshot3d. If you aren't already subscribed to our channel, please take a moment to do so by clicking on the link in the chat area so you'll be notified when new learning content is posted. And speaking of learning content, I would like to mention an exciting opportunity to learn, which is KeyShot RenderWorld 2018. And this is the International KeyShot Conference on 3D rendering and interactive visuals. This is from May 21st through 22nd at the Paseo Hotel and Spa in Huntington Beach. If you're interested in learning about KeyShot, getting hands-on with workshops, with professional speakers, and networking with other KeyShot users, this is a great event to do so. You can find out more at keyshot.com/renderworld, where you can get some information and also register there. So please take a moment to go to that link and check out all the great stuff we have planned for RenderWorld 2018. So KeyShot 7.2 is a free update to anyone running KeyShot 7 and can be found at keyshot.com/downloads or downloaded and installed directly from the help menu inside of KeyShot by clicking on check for updates. And if you're on Mac, that will be in the Apple menu. If you're still running KeyShot 6 or earlier, you can contact sales@luxion.com to learn about upgrade options to take advantage of all the great new features and improvements in KeyShot 7. We've compiled a 7.2 specific release notes in our online manual, which we have linked to in the chat section, so you can go and take a look at that. Today, Will and I will be going over these notes and demonstrating each of them to you live. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I wanted to talk about today is the user interface updates. So these include some exciting new UI features that those of you on high resolution displays will be super happy to finally have support for in KeyShot. So let me go ahead and show you. Okay, so the setup I'm working on right now, this is my 1920 by 1080 display. And then to the left here, I have a 4K display, which I have some system font scaling enabled. So if we bring up our display settings, we can see that for my 4K display, I have the system scaling set to the recommended value, which is 150%. So now we have dynamic UI scaling when the system font scaling is enabled. So if I were to drag this over to my 4K display, we would see that text update. So let's go ahead and change my screen to show the 4K. And as I drag this over, we'll see that the text areas will dynamically resize to fit all of the text. So this eliminates that horrible text clipping that would have occurred in past versions and actually makes KeyShot usable on screens with font scaling enabled. So this is very nice to have. Now, this improvement only scales the text and not the icons. So if you are interested in also scaling up the icons, we have added a new feature for that as well. And that is high DPI support. So to access that, we'll go to Edit, Preferences, and in the Interface section, there is an option for high DPI support, which requires a restart. So we'll save our changes, restart, and it opened up on my 1920 by 1080 display. So let me just drag this over. And now we can see it dynamically updates, nice large icons, nice readable text. So now we can really take advantage of using KeyShot on our high resolution displays with system font scaling enabled. So when you do this, you may notice that the real-time view gets a little fuzzy, a little lower res. To overcome this, we've added an option here in the ribbon for render in high DPI. That should show automatically when you enable support for high DPI and preferences, but if you're not seeing it, for example, if you have a saved workspace active, you can right-click and show it by enabling it here in the ribbon and then save that to your workspace so it's there every time you open KeyShot. So if I show the heads-up display, we can see that when we enable render in high DPI, we'll respect that physical pixel size and we'll get that nice crisp image in the real-time view. And so this is only affecting the real-time view. It's not something you need to worry about when you're rendering with render output. But it does behave similar to kind of performance mode in that when you do have render in high DPI enabled, you'll be getting that higher res, so performance might be a bit slower. Perhaps you may want to work on your scene with render in high DPI disabled when you're doing initial setup, and then to dial in the final materials, you can render in high DPI to get the nice crisp appearances. All right, and the last UI item I wanted to mention is user-defined font size. So if you have a high resolution display without system font scaling enabled, this will be the option for you. So I'm going to go back to my display settings on the other screen here, set this to 100%. And so the benefit of doing this is we get a lot of screen real estate. So if I go to, say, my advanced workspace, I can show my animation panel, and I get lots of room for all my my panels and my docked windows. But the text does get a little difficult to read. So to overcome this, we can go to Edit, Preferences, again to the Interface section, and there's a new item for font size. So we can select a larger font size, get a preview here, save the changes, and then that'll update. So now you get that nice large screen real estate for all your panels, but you can actually read the text there. So a quick recap of the UI updates in 7.2. Jump back over to my other screen. Yep, so we have the dynamic UI scaling when system font scaling is enabled. And this is applicable when the system font scaling is less than 200%. We have the high DPI support, making the interface easier to use, and on high resolution displays with system font scaling enabled. We have the render in high DPI, which respects the physical display size, ensuring high quality real-time image when system font scaling is enabled. and we have the user-controlled font size. All right, so the next item I wanted to talk about is the configurator. Now, the configurator is a pro-only feature, whereas all the UI updates I mentioned, those are available to all users of KeyShot. So 7.2 brings some usability improvements to the configurator, along with a new powerful feature that allows you to render multiple variations of a single job. Let me go back to my system font size. And I'll go to my default workspace. Okay, so the first usability improvement is the ability to reorder model and material variations. So let me jump into one of my model sets here, and I'll grab my my studio, and then I'll jump into the configurator wizard. And now if we go to the summary tab, we can see there are a couple arrows here. So these arrows then control the display in which the models and the materials are ordered in presentation mode. So if we go into presentation mode now, we can see we have them in numerical order, but let's say we wanted these 301 and 302 to come first in our thumbnails. We can do that by selecting it and just moving it up in the list. So now we have 301 at the top, and then we'll take 302 and move that to the second item. And the same goes for the materials. So let's say we wanted beige to be the first option. We can move that up. And all the materials I have in this scene are linked, so that's why you see as I move one, it moves them in all of the different options. So now if we go into presentation mode, you can see we have 301 and 302 first, and we have beige first. If we go back into the configurator wizard, actually we'll go to the render dialog to show you the new Configurator Output option. So this is a brand new tab, a brand new feature available for render output, where you can render all the model, material, or studio variations in a single job. So we can select which ones we'd like to include, and you can see the total number of images will update as we enable and disable these checkboxes. Other than that, we get all the same options that we have for still image output. And I've already rendered out all these variations, so you can see what that would look like. And each image output is accompanied by its metadata file. So this metadata file can be referenced. If we open this up in Notepad, we can see which model set was active, which submaterial is active, and which studio is active. So this is helpful just for referencing which variations are active in each of those output images. And so that metadata will be output automatically when you're rendering locally or via network rendering. But we also have an option a new feature for metadata for still images. And again, this is a pro-only feature. And it can be enabled by just selecting the checkbox here for metadata when you're rendering out a still image. Now, this metadata output, this is only available for local rendering. When rendering via the network, you will not get the output for now. And so I've rendered out a file as a PSD. And let's say this was a production image that we wanted to include our metadata and save it in with the file. So output with the file was this XMP format. XMP is a native Adobe format, but we can read this with our notepad. And there's a ton of information in here that can be referenced if you have to re-render the image at some point and you're interested in your camera data, what camera is active, your environment settings, your material settings, also your lighting settings, so your render quality. And we can save this into our Photoshop file by going to File Info. And if we have raw data selected, we can go down here, select Import. And I can point to that XMP file. And I can add that in and save it in with my PSD. So then if for some reason we need to go back and reference this image or re-render it a few months down the line and we forgot all the settings we used, we can go back in and reference that metadata to do so. All right, so that's it for me. Talked about the UI updates, the configurator, and metadata, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Will, and he's going to talk about some user interface items, materials, and more. So let me make him presenter.
All right, thanks for that good overview of all those new features, Rex. I want to verify before I move on that everyone is indeed able to see my screen. I suppose if I don't hear otherwise, I will assume that you can. All right, so as mentioned, we have a few more features to cover. The items I'm going to cover here are going to be a bit scattered. There are a lot of small things, some incremental updates that should give you a much more pleasant experience. You know, we're always looking to improve KeyShot little by little. And so starting off with user interface here, the first item that we have here is a startup focal length. So what this means, if I hop on over to my KeyShot scene, is that we have a default value of 50 applied to the perspective. And so, let's see, I've got my, there we go. So if I were to change my camera to my free camera, you'll see that it was previously locked and then now it's unlocked. So this allows me to make a change. If I were to type in, say, 70 or 20, you can see that very dynamically changes our perspective. Well, we used to have a default of 35, which you may have become accustomed to, but in an example like this here, where we have a product that's likely going to be shown as a catalog or a studio style rendering where you don't want a lot of heavy distortion happening within the frame or to the product or image, 35 is going to be a bit aggressive as far as how wide of a lens or how extreme your perspective that you'd be shooting with would be. So after noticing that people were likely to switch to something more conservative, like 50, which is pretty common for, say, a portrait or a product, we decided to go ahead and make that the startup scene perspective. So just takes one more step out of your workflow if you're used to rendering products, and it serves as a pretty good starting point. So that's a nice little update that we've got there. Another item on this list is the option to reorder model sets. So this kind of builds on what Rex was showing you earlier, which is the ability to reorder some items within the configurations that you've built. Likewise here, if I were to look at my model sets that I have created, I can just drag and drop to reorder these. So we're looking at number 201, and it falls near the bottom of the list. And if I want this to be right after the default one and right before model set number 1, I would just drag this up, and where I let go, when I let go, it will be placed wherever that line is drawn. When I'm talking, what I mean by line is the white line, since I'm running the dark theme, should see it. Okay, I'm not getting that to place for whatever reason. So let's see if I've got the, there we go. So for some reason I did not have the magic touch earlier. As I'm dragging, we're getting a hovered state, and then when I let go, it should be placed right on top of the icon or the thumbnail I'm hovering over. So being able to reorder your model sets is something that, you know, if you want to be able to control your layout, your, you know, if you want to kind of adjust how these are presented, or maybe you just have a certain, you know, number 1, number 2, number 3, whether it's for presentation or just cleaning up your scene, that's something that will make things quite a bit more pleasant for you. As far as reordering goes, we're going to stick with that theme for a second and look at the idea of reordering items within the scene tree. And so this has to do a little bit with how, when you reorder an item, how it looks or how the highlighted state appears. So when I click on an item here, if I wanted to move this up, we can see as I'm dragging, we're getting either a solid blue outline box or a dashed broken line, and that's going to place it between the items. And so when I let go, it is going to still give us a warning that says we may affect things like live linking and texture mapping, and that's okay. I'm going to hit continue. And of course, the item that I dragged around will be positioned where I want it to be. So that's something that is definitely a little bit easier to understand what the behavior will be, because that dashed line, of course, is going to tell us it's going to be placed between those currently, between the 2 items that you're dragging it between within the scene tree. So little stuff, but all these little things add up to create a pleasant workflow and user experience for you guys. So hopefully you enjoy that. The next thing I wanted to call out here is something called rounded edges. This is a little known, or in some cases underutilized, feature that's actually quite powerful, so it's always nice to bring it up. And this is the idea that we can apply a perceived radius to our CAD models in KeyShot, saving us a lot of time at the modeling level. So I'm going to actually skip ahead a slide to show you what this actually looks like. Here on the top left, we have a model of a keypad with no rounded edges. So this is just modeled in CAD. Specifically, this came from Fusion 360. And it's a little assembly with some keys and a little PCB and then a base. And there are no fillets applied to anything, no chamfers or blends. And it tends to look fake because of that. But of course, when working in CAD, sometimes we don't have time to do all the rounds or you know, sweat the details. And when it comes time to render, of course, we do want things like radii or chamfers. Those little details are what makes something look realistic. So we can save ourselves quite a bit of time by just throwing rounded edges on items. And you know, there will be times where, say, the corners are not going to totally round, but you know what? This function does do a magnificent job on things like the edge of this tray, where there are no corners to begin with, but just edges that go around a rounded object. So some scenarios will work better than others, but At a quick glance, I will say with the rounded edges, this definitely looks a lot better than the one without rounded edges. So what's the improvement? Well, the improvement is that this rounded edges can be applied to all your items, even at the group level. So I'll show you what that means in KeyShot. And I'll go ahead and save the scene, and I'm going to actually launch another KeyShot scene. Let's minimize this for a second here. Okay, so I've got my keypad. I'm going to open this up. And you'll see it doesn't have rounded edges on it to begin with. There we are. And again, when we were historically to put, if we were to put rounded edges on something, you could click on the item within the scene tree, and below the scene tree in the properties tab, you'll see that there's something called rounded edges and a radius slider, and the units these are displayed in will be based on whatever your object was modeled in, or whatever your model units were set by the CAD application. Now, if I were to grab this and drag this up, we'll start to see that the edge on the base starts to be rounded, and I can continue this for quite a while, and it just gets softer and softer. And it's pretty cool. So we've had this for a bit, but we have improved it over the past few releases. But what we are really excited about now is the fact that we can go ahead and apply this not just at the body level or the part level as shown here, but if I were to grab a group of parts, see it's a group level here as it shows under the properties tab, I can increase this radius. And there's a bunch of items actually inside these keys you're not seeing here. So let me go ahead and grab the entire assembly, which contains a few sub-assemblies as well as a body. So again, we're in the group level. If I were to just highlight that and type in 1 millimeter, everything within that assembly is getting that rounded edges applied to it. So I just saved myself tons of time, whether it was modeling or going through in KeyShot one by one, applying those rounded edges. So again, just want to make sure that one's understood, because that's going to save a lot of you quite a lot of time when you start throwing your model in for a quick rendering. This is going to be closed. I'll get back into our other example to continue on. All right, so the other item I want to call out here that's relevant to the user interface is that we have a center and fit model hotkey. So KeyShot 7, we introduced hotkeys that you could program and change, and we've added a few more to that list with each one of our releases. And one very important one, or very useful one here, center and fit. Go ahead and just throw this in full screen and then tab on over here. So if I go to my camera, we see that we're in our free camera, so I can go ahead and navigate my scene freely. But if I want to center and fit my model, I'm going to hold Control, Shift, Alt, and right click on the mouse, and that's going to go ahead and center and fit my model. Very nice. So regardless of how far away your camera is, if you're not, if you're not zoomed in on a part, you can always quickly get back to where you want. You could also have been maybe working on a little detail. Maybe I was working on the material for this base, and I just want to center and fit the whole model. Very nice. So again, that's Control, Shift, Alt, right click. But for anyone who doesn't feel like remembering that right now, we also have our K hotkey. That's going to bring up our list of all of our hotkeys. And the center and fit is right here near the top. You can see the center and fit, Alt, Control, Shift, right mouse button. All right. What else do we have in our list here? So we have some small updates to the materials user interface. The first of which is the ability to drag and drop material preview sphere. So a lot of times when you're new to KeyShot, or maybe you've come from another program where you're used to a different workflow, if I were to double click on my multi-material here, we will see that we've got a material sphere preview. And as I click on different materials, you can see that this preview is updating. Historically, this has been just a tool so you can kind of understand what your material looks like in the current lighting situation. But what we can do now is actually just drag this directly onto a part as well. So before you could not do that, now you can do that, which is pretty neat. I'm going to hit Control Z just so we don't have both of those same parts on our model. But yeah, so that's a nice little update, the ability to drag that material preview sphere, it's a mouthful, onto any parts within your scene. And then another one here, metallic paint has a clear coat, which is a nice little feature that we added for KeyShot 7. But to extend that, we've got a clear coat bump texture button that's now added to that material type. So again, getting back into KeyShot, I really do love KeyShot's metallic paint material for creating some complex finishes. One of which is, let's see, I think I have a, yeah. So here we've got a, actually I've got a metal type. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and throw a, or just convert this, I suppose, into a, where are we? Metallic paint, there we go. And while we're in here, you know, metallic paint's great because it's got a lot of different options for customizability. And then we've got this clear coat option here, which just gives you the option to change things like the color of the clear coat and the thickness, its refractive index, all sorts of great stuff. But what we've now added here is a clear coat bump texture button. And historically, you had to use the material graph to access this textured parameter. But now, of course, you can just drag a material, I'm sorry, a texture, if you will, onto this. Or if we wanted to apply a procedural texture, you could right click on this, go to textures, and then just choose your texture. All right, let's see what we have in our list here now. So we already saw this, our rounded edges. Another one, I just wanted to show you kind of a side-by-side or a before and after rendering of a comparison of the motion blur or the shadow produced by an object that has motion blur applied to it. 7.2, of course, we've taken care of ironing out a bug related to this. So we have nice, smooth, motion blurred shadows, which is definitely helpful. And now, the rest of these items here are kind of grouped in the render category. So these are going to have to do with output and all of our render options. And that, that shadow produced by a motion blurred item, that's also, you can see at the bottom of this list. So we've already seen that. Let's jump to the top of our list and take a look at our label render pass. So this is something that's quite exciting. If I want to apply a label to my part here, let's jump back in our textures and I'll look at my label. I'm going to grab just a KeyShot icon and throw it right here on this chair as a label. And let's see, I'm going to adjust its mapping type, and I will scale it down a little bit so it's right on the edge of our chair. And I'll just reposition it. Cool, so we have ourselves a texture on this, I'm sorry, a label on our chair. And if I were to go and render this out and send this out with a, well, I'll get to that in just a second. But when we're looking at our layers and passes, we see that we have all of our different render and render passes as well as layers that we can choose for our output here. The new one on the list is labels. So this is going to render out an image with transparency, and I think it will be an EXR file, and we will have just our label isolated to that image. The other thing that I'm going to call out here is if we were to output a clown pass, we see an icon next to the clown or a gear icon, which tells us we can change some settings. And here we see the option to separate labels in clown pass, which means a clown pass will also show our label, making it easy to select just that label and then make some adjustments in post if we were doing some Photoshop editing. So now that I've set these up, I'm going to go ahead and render this out. Let's check, just check how, Yep, okay. I'll set a very low number here just so this renders as quickly as possible. And I'm going to go ahead and say render, and our image is rendering. So we've got our label on our chair. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the folder that it's going to be rendered out to. If I look at my renderings, here we go. We see that we have a label pass as an EXR. And if I double click on this, if I had Photoshop installed here, it would open up, but we're going to go ahead and skip that. This will produce a transparent image with our label on it. The next one I want to call out is the right here, our clown pass that has our label easily selectable as well, which is really nice. And then of course the composite JPEG image here. So that should be very helpful if you're doing things like cars, or I don't know, I suppose any item that has labeling, logos, things like that, where you may need to adjust them. Definitely helpful, definitely exciting to have that in KeyShot now. And so that is our label render pass, as well as the fact that our clown pass includes labels as well. So let's look at the next item on the list. We have render queue displays details. That sounds cool. So if I were to add this to my render queue, actually I have a bunch of studios pre-configured or made. And if I were to, oh no, I have model sets. So if I were to add my model sets, let's go ahead and do that. I'll uncheck a few of them. Let's say I just want to send a few of them. I'll go ahead and hit add. And as this does so, we're going to see that we have options to, or some extra information displayed in our output. So we have our image with our preview. We have the name of the actual file, as well as the model set, I believe, is included. And then we have our JPEG as our format, our resolution, our frame count. So of course, if this was an animation, we would see more frames than just one. And when I hover over an item, you will see we have other information like file name, last modified, what else is in there? The render type, so maximum samples, and then we can see our actual choice for our number. So this kind of goes hand in hand with some of that metadata that Rex showed you earlier. But again, just helping you have an understanding in a production environment of kind of what work you've done and what's included, and some of the details surrounding the images you are about to render out. So that's pretty great. As mentioned, some of our render passes have been improved, and there's a lot of little tweaks that I don't have quite the amount of time to go over here during this presentation, but Clown Pass is one I want to call out. So if I move down here, I just want to show a side-by-side. 7.1 versus 7.2, you can see different colors, but the key thing here is that KeyShot's doing some interesting things behind the scenes to more intelligently assign colors to different materials. So our Clown Pass is going to have a higher likelihood of having a greater contrast between the colors that are applied. So as you have more and more materials throughout your scene, you are less likely to get colors that are close to one another. So this will definitely help improve the Clown Passes for your compositing or your Photoshop or post-production edits. Another one is that our Shadow Pass is rendered to a white background instead of black. So of course that helps. You just take your Shadow Pass and set it to a blend mode of multiply, and that will allow it to behave properly with any other images you've rendered out. Also, the reflection pass has been improved for several material types. We had metallic paint and some other materials that were a little bit more complex, and we've made improvements to how the reflection pass is handled, so those are done more accurately and more consistently across all of our material types. So add to render layer is I should mention, render layers is another one of those, almost like a little hidden feature, kind of like the rounded edges, and they're something that's kind of underutilized in my opinion. But if we were to get back into our KeyShot scene and we wanted to add an item to a render layer, what we would do is go and choose a part in our scene tree, And if I right click and say render layers, I can add this to a new render layer. And if we look in our render layers, we can see render layer 1. Here it is. We've had the option to add render layers for quite a while. And what this will do is it will render out this item that is on the render layer as its own image with a transparent background. So again, this helps with compositing and post-processing and editing and all that good stuff. But now when we go to do our final rendering, if we look at our output, do you see here we have all renders in layers? This checkbox is now by default enabled when we create a render layer or add something to a render layer. The reason this is important is because if you had created render layers in the past, but you forgot to hit this checkbox, it wouldn't actually render them out. So now we've done that. And I'll call attention to this as we're here. We still have some options if you want to have greater degree of control over your alpha transparency mode, meaning how the masking is handled with these render layers. But this is nice. So again, we're going to make sure you don't forget to output those render layers when you want to. So real-time region renders for animations. This is also a nice one here. If we look back in KeyShot and I were to apply a region render, let's say I have decided to replace, or maybe I've changed the lighting on my chair here, and I don't want to re-render the entire image because I have a short deadline or I need to turn this image around as quickly as I can. I just want to re-render the bucket part of this chair, not the whole image. All right, so now I've drawn a region render box, but let's say I've got this item doing a turntable. I'm going to go ahead and apply an animation to this really, really quickly, just so we have an animation in our scene. All right, so now that I've got my animation applied to my scene, when I go to do my animation here, we can see, if I expand this, we have this option for region, which has now been added. And of course, it's checked by default because we've got the region up in our real time. So anyone who's not familiar with the region render, all this does is this will isolate the output to the area that's inside the box, and that will therefore give us faster render times because it's not rendering as many pixels. Pretty cool. So that's a nice little improvement. Made it in there for KeyShot 7.2. And the one that we had already talked about earlier, which was our improved ground shadows with motion blur. Again, just a nice smooth shadow that works in the default KeyShot ground when you have an item casting a shadow that's got motion blur enabled. And we already saw our clown pass comparison. So as far as our actual live demo, this is going to wrap it up. I think at this point we will open it up to Q&A, so you guys can ask any questions that you guys have, and we'll do our best to answer those. And I suppose if Rex has an answer or anything else to add, he can join in. But other than that, thanks for your attention and time today, guys. Hopefully this has been helpful, and hopefully you guys are ready to download your update of KeyShot 7.2.
Hey, Will, thanks for that. Yeah, I just wanted to mention a couple things. One is just to clarify that the metadata for still image output is available for all formats, not just PSD. And something else I wanted to mention is that we do have a new plugin for SolidWorks that we have on our plugins downloads page, and that now supports motion studies. We do have SolidWorks World coming up next week where we'll be officially announcing the plugin, and we may have one more update coming out for that. But yeah, those of you that are running SolidWorks 2018, you can grab that plugin and use that to get your models over, since we're just receiving the data kit importer over the last week for importing those 2018 models directly into KeyShot. And let's see let's see what other questions we have here. Brett mentioned the ability to save the render queue. I just wanted to mention that if you do want to save your render queue, what you can do is before sending those jobs to render, you can go into your scenes folder and you'll find a queue.xml file along with some .ext and .geom files. You can save those to another folder if you do want to be able to send those again. You cannot edit those jobs or modify them, but you can resend the same jobs. David is asking if we have any plans to further develop the configurator. And yes, we do. We are currently working on a new product which will allow anyone to open configurator files without a license of KeyShot. So this will be a free viewer that you will be able to open up your configurator files. And with that, we have some updates to the interface and the user experience. But for now, the main thing to look forward to is that free viewer.
Hey Rex, do you happen to know if the metadata will contain information as to how long an item was rendering?
Only if you're using max time mode. Then it will include the information. However, there is a new item in network rendering for KeyShot 7.2. So if you are using network rendering, you'll be able to look in the log for each job. This is the log file that is in the network resources folder, and also the log tab in the network queue. And this will actually tell you how long the job was rendered and how many cores were used to render. But as far as rendering locally, the amount of time spent will only be indicated if you're using max time mode.
Awesome, that's definitely helpful. I saw somebody asking a question about the, asking when we'll be able to output VR that gives you a head-mounted display VR experience. I don't know if they're asking about something else, but it's, maybe they didn't hear that KeyShot 7 is now offering head-mounted display VR experience, and there's a number of experiences you can actually get or build, and that depends on what you've built, whether that's an animation or you've outputted some spherical images. So I don't know. I mean, there's definitely some more there that they can read up on. I don't know if you want to add to that, Rex.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Not for now. I think, yeah, what you mentioned is a good overview. We do have some items planned in the future, but yeah, we'll announce those as we are further developed.
Excellent. There's one other question there that I find is a good question. Somebody was asking if rounded edges adds to the size of the file, or does having more fillets in your model. I will say that definitely having a heavier geometry or a model with a bunch of little fillets is going to increase the file size faster or to a greater degree than using rounded edges will.
Yeah, and JS Gauthier is asking about panoramic output. So we do have panoramic output for rendering 360 images. That is a camera type, and you can read about that in the manual.
I'm not sure if it's been answered already or not. It doesn't look like it. Okay, so Brett was asking if it's a possibility to adjust label opacity, and was talking more specifically for showing semi-translucency or pad printed stuff. A reminder or a way to think about labels is that they are indeed a material type. So labels have materials. And if you were to apply an opacity to either the texture on the label or the material that the label is on itself, it should give the result, or one of those two approaches should give Brett the result they're looking for.
We also have someone asking if the rounded edges feature supports more than one radius size. And yeah, you can assign a different value for each separate object in your scene tree. All right, I think that does it for today. Thank you all for joining us. Again, a recording of this webinar will be available at youtube.com/KeyShot3D. And keep an eye out for next month's webinar and the rest of our learning content that we upload onto our YouTube page. Go ahead and jump over there if you're interested in learning more. Again, check out KeyShot.com/RenderWorld to learn about our event that we're having in May. We would love to have all of you joining us down here in Huntington Beach, where it's nice and sunny. The Paseo Hotel and Spa is right on Pacific Coast Highway with a view of the beach and the ocean. It's an amazing venue, an awesome event with tons of great content, great speakers, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you there.